Hi guys, today I'm playing Darkest Dungeon on my PS Vita. So if you haven't played Darkest Dungeon before, it's basically a dungeon crawler RPG where you take a team of warriors into various dungeons, go through turn-based battles to ultimately complete a goal of the dungeon. And so the goal can vary. Sometimes it may be to defeat a boss monster, it may be to explore 90% of the rooms, or it may be to capture 3 items. So for this Let's Play, it's kind of in 2 parts. The first part is where I take a team of new recruits, so these are all level 1 fresh characters, into one of the easy dungeons. And then the second half is where I take one of my more experienced teams to try and fight one of the bosses of the game. And it turns out very badly, as you'll see later on. So let me start out by saying I love this game. In terms of RPGs, it's actually amazing. The battle system is really interesting, with a variety of characters that you can put into your party, and all of them have very different skills and abilities. And then also, what really sets this game apart from other RPGs is the atmosphere. It's called Darkest Dungeon, and as you can see from the graphics, it's very dark. And so at the top of the screen you can see there's a kind of a torch indicator, and as that goes down and down, the enemies become stronger and stronger and you become weaker. And so you want to use your torches to light the dungeon, to make your enemies a bit weaker and make your party a bit more resilient to the dungeon. There's so many different mechanics in this game to go through, so I'll touch on all of those if I can in this video. In terms of the story of the game, you've inherited a mansion from your uncle, and your uncle would explore the caverns underneath the mansion, and he found portals to dark dimensions that he would go and explore. And so your purpose in this game is to recruit soldiers to then go into these dimensions, defeat the demons there, and ultimately defeat the Darkest Dungeon, which is the kind of final level of this game. And so to win the game, you actually need to defeat the Darkest Dungeon 3 times. There's varying levels of dungeons to go and explore, from easy, medium to difficult, and then you've finally got the Darkest Dungeon. When your party completes a level, they gain experience and they level up. And so what you want to do ultimately is to take parties through these dungeons, through each level of the dungeon, to eventually make them strong enough to take on the Darkest Dungeon. So you can actually take your characters, even new characters, into some of the more difficult dungeons straight away if you want to, but they won't survive. So you want to take them into the lower dungeons, and for the way the dungeons work, the easy dungeons are recommended for characters of level 1 and 2, and then as you gain experience and get stronger, then level 3 and 4 characters will go into medium, 5 and 6 will go into hard. And for the Darkest Dungeon, you really need to be kind of level 6 to be able to survive it. So I mentioned that the atmosphere of the game is really what sets it apart. And it's not just kind of the dark graphics. It does, which adds a lot to the game, but during the battles, the sound effects are really impactful. When one of the enemies slices you with a knife, or you get bitten or something, you can really kind of feel that. Playing this game in the dark with headphones on really loud, it's really... you almost feel every attack and every blow. For me, every time one of my characters was hit, it would almost make me cringe inside from just the feeling of just the pain. Like you could almost share your character's pain because it feels so realistic, the sounds of this game. And at the same time, you get so happy and relieved when one of your characters lands an attack. And this game is extremely hard. You can have a team of very well leveled characters going into a dungeon. I remember having a good team going through a whole dungeon, breezing through all of it, then getting towards the very end of the dungeon and going into a battle against even some fairly weak enemies, but it can just all go wrong so easily and so quickly. If your attacks just don't land when you want them to, if the enemy manages to dodge your attacks, but then their attacks all land, your team can just fall apart so quickly. The game has got a sanity meter for each character. It's out of 200, and as long as you're below 100, then you're still considered sane. But as the dungeon gets darker, if you don't use your torches to light up the dungeon, or as characters take damage, or as they get afflicted by various ailments from the enemies, then their sanity meter increases, or, well, they become more insane. And there's a point when your insanity meter becomes 100 out of 200, then you're going to get some kind of affliction, like a permanent affliction on the character. So maybe it'll be like masochism, so that they'll self-harm themselves, or they'll be too scared to actually start attacking. and they'll just stand back and not always respond during battles. And having that happen can just really damage your party, and it damages the whole morale of your party when one person becomes insane, because then the rest of your party also starts suffering this in terms of their sanity as well. Once you complete a level, you can take characters and try and heal them of these afflictions. So each character is different in terms of how they respond to different medications and different treatments. So some of them who are God-fearing, they may go to a church and want to have confession, and then their ailment will go away. Or maybe they'll need to go to a brothel, or maybe just go to a pub and drink. So when I first started playing this game, I took it as I need to take my characters and try and level them up, get them stronger as soon as possible to take them into the darkest dungeon. But this tactic is completely wrong. So if you're starting out this game, my biggest tip for you is don't worry about losing characters. In fact, don't worry at all. You should almost spend the first 20 trips into the dungeons just using low-level characters like new recruits and sending them into the dungeon with no extra gear. So you can buy characters gear before they go into a dungeon, so like food or something to recover health or more torches. But sending a new party into the dungeon with no extra gear, and their only purpose is to collect money. So even if 3 out of 4 of the party die, then you take the one person remaining and have them escape the dungeon with money. That's all you really want to do. And the reason for that is, in the hub town, which you'll get a look at later in this Let's Play, you want to buy upgrades for your soldiers and upgrades for the town as well. So for initially, you just want to take characters into the dungeon, get money and get out. And if your characters happen to complete the dungeon and level up, then that's fine. Maybe you keep them aside and save those characters for later. But otherwise, just keep trying to use new characters, burn through them, and just earn as much money as possible. And then once you've upgraded the town, and so you've unlocked like new weapons for your characters, you've unlocked new areas in terms of treatments for your characters, then by then you would have familiarized yourself with the different character types and their abilities and their strengths and weaknesses. And then you can choose your team to actually go in and try and level them up for ultimately running against the darkest dungeon. So I've actually beaten the darkest dungeon on this game, but only once, so I haven't finished it 3 times. Once you have a team that goes into the darkest dungeon and wins the game, you actually can't take them back into the darkest dungeon. That team becomes so scarred by their experience of getting through it that they won't go back in again. Which is kind of annoying, because you have this team that you leveled up from 1 all the way to level 6. You've upgraded all their weapons and abilities, but they can only go into the darkest dungeon once. It means you have to develop at least 12 characters to be able to make these runs on the darkest dungeon, which is not an easy thing to do, because as I said, the game is super hard. Later in the Let's Play, when you see that I go up against one of the bosses, that's a medium level, and I've got a pretty decent team of level 3 and 4 characters who are all upgraded in terms of weapons, and still I get destroyed by the boss. Getting to the boss was actually quite straightforward. I managed to get there quite okay, but actually taking on the boss is really hard, and I just got completely destroyed. In terms of the battle mechanics, so all the characters have got different abilities. They've got around 4 different abilities that you can use during a battle, and you can set those abilities before you go into the actual battle. And it's really important to understand the strengths and weaknesses of each character, and also the abilities and the strengths and weaknesses of the abilities. Character placement is really important as well. So you may have a knight who's very good at the front row, but if he accidentally gets kicked to the back row by an enemy attack, which can easily happen, then he's almost useless. His abilities have no effect, he can't actually attack anymore. And you have to waste your turns trying to get him back into the front row. If you have a ranged attacker like an archer or a magic user, and they accidentally get stuck in the front row, then you're wasting your turns trying to get them into the back row again so that they can become more effective. And this is how the boss beat me at the end of this Let's Play. Just by screwing up my ordering, it got me to a point where my Plague Doctor and my Archer were both in the front row and were basically useless at that point. And then my Knight was in the back row and I just couldn't even use any characters. It really damages your team, and then obviously you're getting more attacked, you're losing characters, your morale goes down, you become insane. It's like once you get trapped in this cycle of bad luck, then you just can't win. So there's actually a lot of ways to upgrade and customize your team, but as I mentioned, you don't want to do any of them until you know that you've got a strong team that you're willing to invest in to eventually do a run on the Darkest Dungeon. If you're not sure about how well your team's going to be performing, it's not worth upgrading them too soon. It's better, like I said, just to send people out, let them die, collect as much money as you can, and just use that money to just upgrade your town more and more. It's only when you're getting characters to level like 3 or 4, that's when you really want to start upgrading their abilities and upgrading their weapons and armor, so that they've got a good chance on some of the harder dungeons.
Their formation is broken. Maintain the offensive.
The bosses and the enemies in this game are really hideous. The artwork is really impressive and really in suit with the game's style and atmosphere, as I mentioned. You've got these really hideous creatures you need to go up against. Just the sound effects from them damaging you, from attacking you, it just all adds to make this game just a bit more of a kind of a horrifying experience. For me, that's just awesome. I really enjoyed the impact it had on me. The feeling of hopelessness when you're losing a battle, or the feeling of elation when you're winning a battle and you're taking down a team of tough enemies. It reminds me of Dark Souls in that way. It's extremely hard and extremely rewarding when you actually do manage to take down a tough boss. But it can be really demoralizing to lose a team of warriors that you've been trying so hard to level up and develop. And once you lose somebody, they're gone. And even when a warrior gets afflicted by an ailment, then having to heal them can cost a lot of money, and that's money you can't use to upgrade somebody, or money you can't use to upgrade your town.
This expedition at least promises success. Where there is no peril in the task, there can be no glory in its accomplishment. There is method in the wild corruption here. It bears a form both wretched and malevolent.
So a tactic that I always use for this game, or that I found useful at least, is to stun your opponents. So my Knight and my Plague Doctor both have the ability to stun opponents, and it's just useful in terms of stopping yourself from being attacked for one go and giving yourself a little bit of breathing room from the enemy attacks. And then also trying to inflict them with bleed or with plague, so that then they're losing health every time they have a go. So the team I took in now to the medium dungeon, this was actually a very similar team that I used for the darkest dungeon when I eventually beat it, where you've got a couple of strong frontline characters, the knight and the man with a dog, whose name, apologies, I can't remember, and then using the plague knight and the arbalast the archer in the back row. And so the dog is useful for causing bleed in the enemies, so that drains their health way slowly, and the plague doctor can poison the enemy, which again knocks their health off every go.
Confidence surges as the enemy crumbles. The promise of safety. Annihilated. Foolish horrors. Brought low and driven into the mud. Nature herself, a victim to the spreading corruption, malformed with misintent. press this advantage. Give them no quarter. Continue the onslaught. Destroy them all. Their formation is broken. Maintain the offensive. Seize this momentum. Push on to the task's end. Teetering on the brink, facing the abyss. The slow death, unforeseen, unforgiving. From becoming unwound. As the fiend falls, a faint hope blossoms. Remind yourself that overconfidence is a slow and insidious killer. A spark without kindling is a goal without hope. Wanderers may indeed stalk these shadows, but yonder, a glint of gold. As the light gains purchase, spirits are lifted, and purpose is made clear. The way is lit. The path is clear. We require only the strength to follow it. Twisted and maniacal.
So this is the boss battle against the hag. This all went so wrong for me. The way the hag attacks is she throws one of your team into the cauldron, and you need to quickly attack the cauldron and get them out of it. And the longer you take, the more health they lose. And this makes the fight especially difficult because really you want to be beating the hag, but you spend so much of your time trying to attack the cauldron and save your ally that the hag barely takes any of your damage. And then also what happens here is that she takes some of my characters that I would normally keep at the back of my party and she puts them into the pot, and then when they come out they go into the front of the party, and so my Plague Doctor and my Archer become almost useless when they're at the front of the party, and I have to waste a go to then try and bring them back to the back, which just gives the hag more time to attack, to again throw someone back into the pot. So this fight was super annoying for me. I lost all 4 warriors in this fight, and they were pretty decent strength, level 3 and 4 characters going up against the medium hag. I should have done a lot better, but as I mentioned, I just got into that cycle where she throws someone into the pot and then I have to waste so much time trying to get them out that I just end up losing the battle because I'm not actually attacking her, giving her a chance to basically just destroy me.
devastating blow. In Radiance, may we find victory. Perched at the very precipice of oblivion. More blood soaks the soil, feeding the evil therein. Singular strike.
So, closing thoughts, if you haven't played Darkest Dungeon, it is an amazing game. The mechanics are deep and complex. It's very challenging, but it's also super rewarding. The game will give you moments of relief and happiness at the same time, but also moments of sorrow and frustration. It's just an amazing game in terms of how it makes you feel and how the sound and the graphics just work perfectly together to make the game just dark, have that real sort of dark and
now
evil
the true
atmosphere.
test.
I can't recommend this game enough.
Or
And so
expire.
the Crimson Court DLC should be coming soon to the Vita, which I just can't wait for. That'll be a definite day one buy for me. I mean, you can probably already tell how much I love this game, and so I can't wait to have a reason to kind of go and play more. Eventually, I'd like to actually beat the Darkest Dungeon, but as you can see from this playthrough, I've just lost 4 of my kind of well leveled up characters. So I'm going to have to start again with quite a new team and try and get them to a position where they can start taking on the Darkest Dungeon. And that takes quite a lot of time, but I'd like to eventually get there one day because the game is just so good. I'd love to finish
is
it
a
fully.
tenuous proposition. In this
So guys, thank you for watching. If you have any questions on the game or would like any more information, let me know. And otherwise, have you played Darkest Dungeon? What did you think about it? Let me know in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.
Another life wasted in the pursuit of glory.